Hello, fabulous people, and welcome to a very special episode of the Mama Rose Show with your host, Mama Rose herself. We are very excited for today's episode because we are going in depth into an internationally recognized film festival that is taking on one of the biggest challenges that a festival or industry can do during a worldwide pandemic: going virtual to protect everyone while entertaining the world as well. The Brooklyn Film Festival was created in 1998 by Marco Orsino. Marco founded and directed through 2001 the Williamsburg Brooklyn Film Festival. In 2002, Marco initiated and directed the Brooklyn International Film Festival through the year 2009. Through various successful partnerships and his full commitment to the independent industry, Marco connected the festival with international sponsors and distribution companies and reached out to 120 countries, from which he still receives film submissions in the thousands every year. In 2010, Marco founded Brooklyn Film Festival, which he still directs. The festival began with 2 films and now has a plethora of films being nominated and winning internationally recognized awards, including the 2002 film Hotel, directed by Mike Figgis, who you might remember directed the incredibly powerful Leaving Las Vegas, and becoming nominated for 2 Academy Awards. The Brooklyn Film Festival will be happening May 29th through June 7th, and this year's festival is being offered free of charge to all of you fabulous people. And all that you need to do is sign up by visiting www.brooklynfilmfestival.org. And now we introduce our first Brooklyn Film Festival Filmmaker. So please sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy the show. And I am happy to introduce the directors of the feature documentary Higher Love, with directors Hasan, Oswald, and Alex Spiess. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you?
Thanks for having us.
Doing well, yes. Thank you so much for having us on.
Of course, we're very excited. So can you please give us a brief description of what the film is about?
Sure. So, my name's Hasan, and I'm the director of Higher Love. The film is about, the protagonist is Daryl Gant, and the story follows him as he searches the streets of Camden, New Jersey for his pregnant, drug-addicted girlfriend, Nani. That's kind of the short synopsis, but if you allow a deeper dive, it's a love story that takes place in this post-industrial America that we find ourselves, these kind of fallen factory towns. And we saw Camden as a microcosm of what's going wrong with America, because all of America's problems take place in Camden on a very exaggerated scale. So it's kind of a love story that takes place in that type of environment.
Very interesting. Now, you sort of touched on this, but what was the inspiration behind making this film?
Sure. So we initially started filming actually in Flint, Michigan, and we kind of wanted to capture this failed American dream, especially in these cities. And while we started in Flint, it ended up, the film takes place 100% in Camden, New Jersey, but they share a lot of similarities. So that was the initial inspiration, to show what's going on in these cities. And it really turned into something far different, as most of these documentaries tend to do. But we wanted to study this big picture of what went wrong in these cities and kind of break it down. So I think we as viewers see issues such as joblessness, or the opioid epidemic, or even gun violence. We see them from this huge, really far point of view, and we really wanted to go into these cities and get the human level, or to show that individuals are living these experiences.
And it's funny because I just wanted to add, like, you know, like most documentaries, it ends up being a very different movie from what you set out to make, right? So when we started, especially in Camden, we were looking at it like, how is this city that's right across the river from Philadelphia taken such a severe kind of like tour of growth and decay? It's like really, you know, in a decrepit state right now, and it's had all of this kind of like state assistance and kind of weird corruption and kind of these like public programs that don't go anywhere. And we're like trying to like bite off too much for so long about like this outrage where why the city was in such a failed state after it was like one of the most industrious cities on the East Coast. So but you know, as documentaries go, we get to know Daryl and some of our characters better, and this personal stories evolve. We got to actually ultimately get what we wanted, which was telling this macro micro story of a systemic problem through the lens of like a very personal, you know, family story and story of addiction that we didn't necessarily, you know, have planned when we started, but was always kind of the ultimate goal. So we got lucky in that way.
Are you excited to have your film shown around the world through the Brooklyn Film Festival? And what does this mean to you?
We're really excited. So we started out, we made our world premiere at Slam Dance Film Festival out in Utah at the end of January. And we're a young team. This is my directorial debut. So that was very, very exciting. We started off really hot. We won the Grand Jury Award. And then we had big plans for a really exciting festival run. And then, of course, COVID hit. And so this is kind of our comeback story at Brooklyn. This is our first one after a long layoff. So we're really excited, and especially since it's the first iteration of an online festival, at least in our world. So we're really excited to see how that goes. And also, we're New York filmmakers, so this is going to be our kind of coming home party.
Now, I have to ask, what was it like to film on location in Camden with such an incredibly heartbreaking story?
As a first-time director, at the time, I went to Camden pretty much by myself, without a budget, with very little film experience, and immediately felt over my head that I was in over my head. But then meeting the characters, I was in over my head just because it's known as one of the nation's, for the last 10 years, the last 20 years, nation's most dangerous cities. They're known as heroin highway for the opioid epidemic that's going on in the city. And so immediately I felt very overwhelmed. But once I met my characters and really got to know the people and the city, I just eased into it. And 2.5 years went by, very easily. At the same time, the subject matter is obviously very dark. It's heartbreaking, especially when you grow close to your characters. And in this case, Darnez, the little boy, and Daryl, and of course Nani and the rest of the characters suffering from addiction, you grow really close. And it is hard to be, in a room with an 8-month pregnant woman injecting, or once that child is born and you care deeply about him and the rest of the characters, and you watch them kind of fall apart or further fall apart right before your eyes, and there's very little you can do. Of course, there are things that I would always do to keep my character safe, in particular Nez, the little boy, safe. But it was quite taxing, the 2.5 years on and off that I spent there.
I can only imagine. And Alex, how about for you?
It definitely takes a toll just on the broader level of the subject matter, but it makes it a lot easier when you know that the story is important and the story is worth telling. So that's kind of the crutch that a lot of filmmakers have when they're making conflict documentaries or social impact documentaries, is you can kind of detach yourself from the personal struggle of your characters through your camera and through your if you're editing, and that's easy while you're doing it, but then once it's over, the problem still exists, so you still have to confront that. But at least while you're making the craft, you kind of have this art form to handle it as a therapy.
In the world today, we are faced with such levels of drug addiction. How do you feel that we can make a change to better the numbers of those addicted from what you've learned from making this film?
There's a certain cycle that perpetuates itself upon those suffering from addictions, especially in cities like Camden. Shame is a big part of it, the stigma that comes with being a drug user, that it just repeats and repeats and repeats. So actually the first title of this film, until a very late edit, was Below the Brine. It's a poem by Walt Whitman, who's actually from Camden, New Jersey. And he speaks of a world below the surface of the ocean that nobody ever sees. And there's wars there, there's societies down there, and everyone just ignores it. And Camden is a drive-by city built with high walls on the highway. It's the commuter line goes right over it. It's built to forget Camden. And so we saw these characters, in particular those suffering from addiction, as a perfect analogy and a perfect link into this poem, that people just think of those suffering from addiction as souls to be forgotten. It's not our problem. They got themselves there. But what we learned, and there's a great quote that Marianne has, is that people think we're monsters. We're not monsters if they just slow down and talk to us. And that's really how we view these characters. They have a story. They want to share their story if anybody will listen. Nobody wakes up and says, oh, I'm going to spend the next 2 decades in the gutter and lose everything. So we would encourage people who are going to watch this movie, and we'd encourage a wider audience as well, to see these people as people, not just as their addiction.
Alex, what about you?
When we were looking at cities like Camden and Flint, it's difficult for any reasonable change to come from any federal level or any local level from the city. So these cities don't have any money, and any change that's happening in communities is happening directly from the community. So you'll see, in our film, the main point of contact for care and for rehabilitation is this woman named Brenta Antinor, and her husband Bill. They run a program called She Has a Name, and it's programs like that. They're former addicts themselves, and now they treat and help get mostly young women off the streets to get into treatment and get into programs. And that's really where the change comes from. It's from the communities.
Before we have to go, can you tell me or tell us in your own words why it's so important to see this film?
On a superficial level, just how we made the movie is pretty remarkable. For first-time filmmakers, zero budget. We did very creative things. Sold my blood plasma to make ends meet. Did return policy tricks. So really, on the surface, from superficial level, really anyone can make a movie like this. Our budget was incredibly low. We worked off a zero budget, close to zero budget. So it really is a testament to pure indie filmmaking. And kind of diving deeper, it's important to see because, yes, it's a very hard watch. This is my mom's probably least favorite film of all time. She said she watched it and she just sat in the side of the bathtub trying to brush her teeth, and she was paralyzed by it, and she never wants to watch it again. But it's a very important film to watch because of this reaction. You can't just drive by these cities. You can't just ignore these people. They are humans as well, and they really need help, and cities like Camden really need help.
As much of a movie of addiction as this is, it's also much more of a movie about love and family, and anybody can relate to that. So, the sacrifices that need to be made between a family that's struggling financially, that's struggling kind of socially, and struggling amongst themselves with their own relationship. Everybody can relate to that. I mean, at some level, if you were a kid that was raised in a broken home, or if you're a parent right now that's struggling to make decisions for what's the best decision for your kids, anybody can understand the sacrifices that need to be made. The only difference is in this movie is that the stakes are incredibly high, and much higher than most family situations. But the other kind of thing that we mentioned at the end of the film is, 1 in 8 kids in America are being raised to homes with a parent suffering from addiction. And that's a really high number. So this is something that, across the country and across the world, the problem is getting worse. And unfortunately, more people than ever can relate to this. And we're all starting to know people that have been affected by, drug addiction, alcohol abuse. Now we have bad drugs, like fentanyl is being put into all sorts of categories of drugs. And this is an education tool for all of those things. So it's complicated, and we hope that it comes across that way, and that this isn't a quick fix of a problem, but it's very abstract. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this all with us, and it's been such a joy to speak to you about this film, because it is a great film to see. So please make sure to check it out at the Brooklyn Film Festival.
I'm trying to find this girl. Have you seen her?
How long has she been missing?
About 4 days.
My father died with a needle in his arm, and my mom used to shoot powder. So it was in my genes to want to get high.
You would think they wouldn't sell to a pregnant person, but they don't have no heart, no compassion.
If I die, I die. I just don't want to go to hell.
It's dope city, man.
I don't think this is gonna be a happy ending.
I told him plenty of times, find somebody better than me. I'm not good for you. I'm poison for you.
Hey, baby. Is it good?
But he doesn't listen.
This is what the deal is. This is what you don't understand, and I'm tired of telling y'all this here. Your story could help the next person.
It is gonna help the whole.
But it's not, because what you're doing, you got too much negativity.
I'm gonna keep on. And this time I mean it. If I don't make it, I'm gonna die this year.
You leave your baby in the car so you can go sell your ass and smoke crack.
I'm gonna be alive for that little boy, He needs me.
Here's the thing, you got nothing to lose and everything to gain. You've got so much to offer. You still got your whole life in front of you.
I don't want to give up on her. How else can I say it? Sucks to love somebody that don't love themselves.
I am here with the director and the director of photography, J.P. Olsen and Brian Zahm of the documentary short, Stan. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. We're very well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, doing good.
So could you give us a description of the film?
Sure. Stan is a person who grew up in Brooklyn, who was a person, as a young man, became a heroin user and then a heroin addict, as it was called at the time, as a teenager in the late 1940s. So he, when he gave his testimony, as I would call it, about his experience, he was one of really just a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 teenage narcotic users from that period of time. So he's really, it's the story of a person who was really the first wave of a teenage narcotic addiction that the world has ever seen, and one of the few survivors of it, certainly to live as long as he did to tell the story.
What was the inspiration behind the film?
So I met Stan while I was working on another film called The Narcotic Farm, which was a history of the Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. And that was essentially a facility, kind of what the Kinsey Institute was to sex, this was to drug study. And so he had been sent there first as a volunteer and then sentenced there a second time. And so he was an invaluable person for the project that I did, which was for PBS about 10 years ago. And when I sat down with Stan, he'd never really talked about aspects of his life, except I think within NA meetings and things like that. So he never talked publicly about what he had been through. And even though we were questioning him at the time more about his experience in that prison and what it was like, he would start to talk about aspects of his childhood. And in some ways, those were so much more interesting to me on a personal level than what we really were asking for. And so I'd always put it away in my mind that someday I would revisit aspects of that interview and try to reanimate it in a way, because I felt like what he was telling me was very special and unusual, and he was at a place in time and a way of thinking in our society about drug use that's so hard to even imagine now. So I felt in terms of just the retrograde and sort of brutal way that he was treated over the years. So I wanted to give voice to that, and I wanted his testimony, as I often will call it, to continue on as a way to inform people to understand what life was like in the 1940s and 50s and early 60s for people who had these kinds of issues.
Now, jumping into the Brooklyn Film Festival, are you excited to be there and being seen around the world with this film?
Brooklyn Film Festival's always been amazing I know me personally, and I love to hear that Stan was in there, so I'm pumped. I wish we could actually go. That'd be cool, but it's cool that people get to see it all over. So it's kind of it's a new phase of film festivals.
Yeah, and I really appreciate how hard everyone at the festival has worked to, the very important and simply easily forgotten "the show must go on" credo that I feel with every note that I'm getting from people, and just the level of engagement and care that people are behind the festival are showing in every interaction that we've had. It's been really nice to see, and been humbling, as they say. And when I first moved to Brooklyn about 25, 30 years ago, I remember going to the Brooklyn Museum, and there were all these people running around with, I think this is my memory, that it was the Brooklyn Film Festival. And I remember going and thinking, wow, those people look cool. Like, what are they doing? And I remember thinking, like, someday, and Brian's already been in this festival a number of times, but it was a thrill for myself and Kristen to get in with Stan. And Kristen is my creative partner and friend and collaborator who's not with us now, but she and I worked on this closely. So I'm sending out her thanks as well.
It's amazing how much, everybody at the Brooklyn Film Festival has been working so hard to make this possible and offering up all these incredible films, but specifically this one, which really took me emotionally in such a short amount of time. And Brian, the photography and the video footage that you used for this film is superb. What was the inspiration behind why you chose such dynamic and emotional settings?
Thanks for the compliment. It always means a lot. Well, JP was the man who kind of, guided us around town and, kind of helped scout some settings. And we went around, and he was the guide. So between his knowledge of the city, his knowledge of the story, and his direction, the settings were, pretty much, their money all day long. In addition to being with JP, like, his soul is so calm. He's a very, very calm collaborator, and it's really a kind of a meditative treat to go out and create and film with him, I have to say. And ultimately, what was really cool and kind of gave me the personal vision was when when JP played back Stan's voiceover, his dialogue, his interview, and you could really hear this richness in his soul about this man, coming to terms with his lot in life and his experience, and so much of that being drug fueled by heroin. So in terms of kind of creating this lucid dream, which is, ultimately inspired by the use of heroin and that sort of thing, that helped inform the lensing and the look for sure. And I definitely was really excited and challenged to film New York and Brooklyn in a whole new way, because it's probably one of the most photographed cities on planet Earth, if not the most photographed city. So it was a great challenge to film in that city. And lastly, it's a period piece. And so we're filming essentially a period piece in modern day Brooklyn and New York. And so then that informed the lensing to kind of, use the different funky lenses to kind of disguise the fact that it's modern day. Definitely wanted to give it a period look. And what was really cool in the final product was seeing how Kristen weaved together the footage. And ultimately, I know JP and Kristen working on the soundtrack too, helping to bring the footage to a whole new level. Was just, I was so happy to see what JP and Kristen did. I feel like I could give them anything, and the movie's going to be amazing.
Drug addiction is so hot of a topic today. What have you learned from your experiences through this film and with Stan, and what do you hope to teach by the making of this film?
I think that it's important that there's an archival or an archived history of a perspective and a place and time that would be easily forgotten. And I think out of that, one thing that I've learned was that, and is that, people who grew up in a time when drug addiction was viewed not like today, where you would, the general feeling is that the person is sick and they need help. That sort of way of thinking always existed, but it certainly was in the minority, and it was generally within a medical community, and even then it was somewhat split. And I guess my point to saying that is Stan grew up in a time and place where what he was doing in terms of his using heroin was akin to about the worst possible crime that you could imagine. And so the term drug fiend was thrown around a lot. So out of that, what I came to understand, speaking with Stan and with others who came up during that time period, was that it was a very deeply psychically wounding experience for people to go through, in addition to the fact that they were using a drug that by definition makes you a criminal, because in order to buy it, you have to break the law typically, and you're breaking the law every time you get it. So in addition to all of the things that we understand as a informed society about what drug addiction can do to a person, there's the added social stigma was so much worse. And that was really clear to me talking to Stan. And in the film, if people have seen it, there is a moment where he talks about the fact that he is wondering even why he's revealing this period of his life. And at that point, he almost got up and walked out of the interview, not because he was upset, but because, well, he was upset, not because of the question necessarily, but that he had put himself in a situation to talk about something that had been so painful. And that to me was a revelation, because I think now it's not like you'll get 3 cheers if you have a recovery from drugs and alcohol, but you can certainly talk about it in an open way and not be vilified in the way that someone like Stan, and certainly his people of his generation, were. So that's, I think, an important thing to remember, is that there has been progress in terms of the way that people can talk about these things and be allowed to reveal something that may have gone against a sort of social mores of the time. And now people can speak about it openly and not have the same level of shame, which I think is very damaging to a person and damaged him. And the second thing is that I think every time I've thought about this film, the thing that I think really is sort of front and center is that even someone who has gone through some of the most difficult things can come out of that, and in some ways even come out often a better person that they had been, a more honest person. And in many ways, Stan went on to do some great things with the knowledge that he had, and was a really positive influence for many, many people. So, I was raised in the Catholic Church. It's like Jesus loves the worst sinners most. That's a bad analogy, but the idea being that there is redemption in every person. And his story to me was very much the story of a person who went through very difficult times and had a redemptive end to his life. And that's really why I wanted to make the film, and why we all worked so hard to try to deliver this, somewhat unusual way of telling the story. You never see Stan, and trying to figure out a way to have it feel both moored to a time and place, but also timeless in a way in its larger message that people can surprise you, and people can turn around their lives.
Yeah, and might I just add that my favorite thing about Stan and a previous work that JP and Kristen and I have worked on is the fact that I feel like Stan really captures a person's soul, their spirit, and their essence. And I love Stan, not just because I worked on it, but just as a cinematic experience. It's very honest, in my opinion, and just cuts to the core. So I'm very proud to have worked on it. I'll tell you that much.
Well, thank you so much for sharing such incredible insight into the film, and we want to thank everyone for joining us here at the Mama Rose Show. And thank you, Director J.P. Olsen and Director of Photography Brian Zahm, for joining us here.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege and a pleasure to meet you and to be in the festival. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, until next time, we will see you soon, and definitely check out the film Stan. It is very powerful and very emotional, and I highly recommend it.